Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner Stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? I found a secret dark web map of the Balkans. The markings show alien activity in Bulgaria's Rila Monastery. Alright, let me start by saying that I'm not the kind of guy who believes in aliens or ghosts or any of that paranormal crap. I'm just a regular dude who likes gaming, browsing Reddit, and occasionally diving down weird YouTube rabbit holes late at night. But for some reason, I always had this stupid curiosity about the deep web. You know, the part of the internet people warn you never to touch. Yeah, that. It all started about 2 months ago. My friend Jake, who's a certified adrenaline junkie, had been raving about this Discord server he joined. Apparently, someone there claimed they'd found a treasure map on the deep web. Sounds fake, right? But Jake kept saying it wasn't gold or jewels. It was something way bigger, like government secrets or hidden locations. Classic conspiracy theorist stuff. I thought it was all BS, but Jake wouldn't shut up about it. He said the map showed weird hot zones all over the Balkans, places like Serbia, Albania, and most notably, Bulgaria's Rila Monastery. That's where it supposedly got really weird. Now, I didn't care about any of this until Jake sent me the link. And when I say link, I don't mean some sketchy .onion deep web marketplace where you'd buy counterfeit IDs. No, this link was a simple URL that shouldn't have existed. It wasn't encrypted, and it wasn't behind a paywall. Just one click, and I was in. The site's interface looked like something out of the early 2000s, with a black background and neon green text. The title across the top said, Zagubanita Mista, which Google Translate told me meant the lost places in Bulgarian. Jake swore it was safe because he'd used a VPN, so I figured I'd check it out, if only to call him out on his BS later. The first thing I noticed was the map. It was old school, like something you'd see in a history textbook, yellowed and torn at the edges, with handwritten Cyrillic notes all over it. There were these red dots scattered across the Balkans, and each one had a date next to it. Most of the dates were from the 1980s and 1990s, but a few were as recent as last year. At the very bottom of the screen, there was a paragraph in English. These are the last known points of extraterrestrial contact in the Balkan Peninsula. The map is incomplete. Rila Monastery, Bulgaria, is the epicenter. Now, at this point, I was rolling my eyes so hard, I nearly gave myself a migraine. Aliens? Seriously? But then I noticed something else. Embedded in the map was a tiny video player. I clicked it, and a grainy black and white video started playing. It looked like security footage. The timestamp said, February 14th, 2023, 3:17 a.m. The camera showed the Rila Monastery's courtyard, which was dimly lit by a single street lamp. At first, nothing happened. It was just an empty courtyard, silent except for the faint hum of static. But then something moved. At first, I thought it was just the wind. A shadow flickered across the screen, fast but deliberate, like someone sprinting just outside the lamp's range. The camera panned suddenly. It wasn't stationary. Someone was controlling it. The view shifted to the monastery's main entrance, where the shadowy figure stopped and crouched near the door. I couldn't see much detail, but it looked humanoid, except its proportions were off. Its arms were way too long, almost dragging on the ground, and its head was elongated, like it had been stretched vertically in Photoshop. Before I could process what I was looking at, the video cut out. "Bro, this is staged," I said to Jake over Discord. "I thought so too," he replied. "But wait till you see what happens next." He wasn't kidding. After the video, the site loaded a new page, a detailed log of sightings at the Rila Monastery, complete with photos. One of the images made my stomach drop. It was taken from what looked like a drone, showing the monastery from above. In the middle of the courtyard, there was a massive circular burn mark. It wasn't just a scorch, it was intricate, like a pattern, a spiral made of smaller spirals, almost like crop circles. And in the very center was something even creepier, an object that looked like a pod. Like, imagine a coffin, but metallic and alien looking, with grooves running down the sides. "That's some Hollywood-level CGI," I said, trying to play it cool, but I could feel my heart racing. "Keep scrolling," Jake said. His voice had lost its usual cocky tone. The next photo wasn't from the monastery. It was a screenshot from Google Earth, dated March 2023. The coordinates were somewhere deep in the Rila Mountains, about 20 kilometers from the monastery. At first glance, it looked like nothing, just dense forest and snow-covered peaks. But when I zoomed in, I noticed something unnatural. There was a massive, triangular clearing in the forest, like someone had cut it out with surgical precision. In the middle of the clearing was a small rectangular building. No roads led to it, and it wasn't marked on any maps. "Dude, this is getting way too weird," I muttered. But Jake didn't respond. The Discord call had dropped. I tried messaging him, but his profile had gone offline. At first, I thought it was just a bad internet connection, but then my computer screen froze. And when I say froze, I don't mean the usual blue screen of death kind of freeze. No, this was worse. My entire monitor went black, except for a single line of red text. "You have been warned." And then my computer shut itself off. I swear I didn't touch the deep web after that. But the story doesn't end there, because 2 days later, I found something taped to my apartment door. It was a manila envelope, unmarked except for a single word scrolled across the front in messy handwriting. Pazise. I didn't need Google Translate to know what that meant. Beware. I didn't sleep that night. I mean, how could I? Someone, or something, knew where I lived. The envelope sat on my coffee table, mocking me. I didn't dare open it. I kept pacing my tiny studio apartment, checking the locks on my doors and windows every 10 minutes, like some paranoid lunatic. Every creak, every sound from outside sent my heart racing. I could hear my upstairs neighbor pacing too, their footsteps heavy and uneven, as if they were dragging something. Normally, I'd ignore it, but that night, it felt like the whole world was out to get me. By 4 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the envelope with trembling hands and tore it open. Inside, there was a single photograph and a small USB drive. The photograph was black and white, grainy, like it had been pulled from some ancient security camera. It showed a room, empty except for a single metal chair bolted to the floor. On the chair was a figure tied up with duct tape. Their head was slumped forward, obscured by shadows, but the hoodie they were wearing looked really familiar. It was Jake's. The bright red Adidas logo on the front confirmed it. "Jake?" I whispered, my voice cracking. I flipped the photo over, hoping for some explanation, but all it said was one word scribbled in the same messy handwriting as before. Bulgaria. At this point, I wanted to call the cops, but what the hell would I even say? Hi, someone sent me a creepy photo and a USB drive, and now I think my friend's been kidnapped by aliens? Yeah, they'd hang up on me before I finished the sentence. Besides, Jake wasn't exactly a saint. He had a bit of a shady past. Petty theft, a DUI, stuff like that. The cops wouldn't take his disappearance seriously unless there was, like, blood involved. And that USB drive? I wasn't about to plug that into my computer and risk another black screen of death. So, I did what any sane person wouldn't. I packed a bag, booked the cheapest flight to Sofia, Bulgaria, and prayed to whatever higher power exists that I wasn't walking into my own murder. The flight was uneventful, but the entire time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I'd see someone out of the corner of my eye, a man in a dark coat, sitting 2 rows back. He wasn't doing anything suspicious, just reading a book, but every so often I'd catch him staring at me, and not the casual kind of stare either. It was the kind of look that made your stomach twist, like when you realize a stranger has been following you home. When we landed, he disappeared into the crowd, but the unease stayed with me. Sofia was cold and gray, the kind of city that feels like it's perpetually stuck in winter. I didn't know a word of Bulgarian, but I managed to find a cab to take me to Rila. The driver didn't say much, but when I mentioned the monastery, he glanced at me in the rearview mirror with this look, half suspicion, half pity. "You go, Rila?" he asked in broken English. His voice was low, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "Why?" "Just sightseeing," I lied. My voice came out shakier than I'd intended. The driver didn't press further, but as we got closer to the mountains, he started muttering to himself in Bulgarian. I caught a few words here and there. Opasnost, danger, proklatia, curse, and something that sounded like исчезване, disappearance. The last one sent a chill down my spine. When we finally reached the monastery, it was almost dusk. The place was beautiful in a haunting kind of way. Massive stone walls, intricate carvings, and towering spires that seemed to pierce the overcast sky. It was quiet, too quiet. No tourists, no monks, not even a stray dog wandering the grounds. Just me and the wind howling through the mountains. The courtyard looked exactly like it had in the video. Same cobblestone ground, same solitary street lamp, casting eerie shadows. But the burn mark I'd seen on the map, it wasn't there anymore. The ground looked freshly cleaned, almost polished, like someone had scrubbed away every trace of what had happened. I walked around, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the silence, until I found the main door. It was slightly ajar. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around and leave, but I couldn't, not after everything I'd seen. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell, like mildew mixed with something metallic. Blood. The hallway was dimly lit, with flickering sconces casting uneven light on the cracked stone walls. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell got. I tried not to breathe too deeply, but it was impossible to avoid. After what felt like an eternity, I found myself in a large, circular room, and that's when I saw it. The chair from the photo. The same metal chair, bolted to the floor, but this time it wasn't empty. Jake was slumped forward, his wrists and ankles bound with duct tape. His hoodie was soaked with something dark. Blood, I realized. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were wide open, staring at me, but seeing nothing. "Jake," I whispered, my voice cracking. He didn't move. I took a shaky step closer, my shoes squelching on the wet floor. That's when I noticed the markings. The walls were covered in symbols, carved deep into the stone. Spirals, triangles, and lines that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. In the center of the room, directly under the chair, was the same spiral pattern I'd seen in the photo of the courtyard. But this time, it wasn't a burn mark. It was glowing, faintly blue, like it was alive. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold my phone. I snapped a picture, hoping to document whatever the hell this was, but the flash went off and illuminated something I wish I hadn't seen. Standing in the shadows behind Jake was a figure. No, not a figure. A thing. It was tall, impossibly tall, with elongated limbs and a head that nearly touched the ceiling. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, and its eyes were solid black, like pools of ink. It didn't move, but I could feel it watching me, studying me. My chest tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs wouldn't work. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the glowing spiral. Then, without warning, Jake's head snapped up. His mouth opened, but the sound that came out wasn't human. It was a low, guttural noise, like static mixed with a growl. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a brief second, I saw something flicker in them. Not fear, not pain, something worse. He was smiling. I don't know how I didn't pass out right there. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and my chest was so tight, I thought my heart was going to explode. Jake, if it was even Jake anymore, just kept smiling at me. His head tilted at this unnatural angle. His lips curled back, revealing teeth that didn't belong to a human. They were too sharp, too jagged, and his gums were black, oozing something thick and dark like tar. "Jake," I whispered, though I knew there was no point. Whatever was in that chair wasn't my friend anymore. What happened to you?" The thing that had been Jake didn't answer. It just kept smiling, its jaw trembling as though it were holding back laughter. Then, out of nowhere, it slammed its head against the back of the chair. Hard. The sound of bone hitting metal echoed through the room, sharp and brutal. I flinched, but it didn't stop. It kept slamming its head back, over and over, until the skin on its forehead split open. Blood and something thicker, something yellowish, like pus, dripped down its face. It should have been screaming in pain, but it wasn't. It was laughing. That's when the glow on the floor grew brighter. The spiral pattern beneath the chair began pulsing, almost like it was breathing. The blue light cast strange shadows on the walls, making the symbols seem like they were shifting, writhing. I stumbled back, my brain screaming at me to run, but my feet refused to move. And then, the thing in the chair spoke, not in Jake's voice. Oh no, this was something else entirely. It was deep and distorted, like a dozen voices speaking at once, overlapping in a cacophony of words that didn't make sense. "You should not have come here." I felt a cold sweat break out across my entire body. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all I could do was stare as the figure in the shadows stepped forward. It was even worse up close. The thing's limbs were impossibly long, its fingers ending in sharp, claw-like tips. Its head was smooth and featureless, save for those black, bottomless eyes. And its skin, God, its skin looked like it had been stitched together from countless bodies, patchy and uneven, with scars running up and down its entire frame. It moved slowly, deliberately, like it was savoring my fear. Then it reached out. One long, bony hand extended toward me, and before I could think, I turned and bolted. I didn't care where I was running. I just knew I had to get out of that room. The hallways of the monastery felt like a maze, twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. I was sure I'd passed the same doorway at least 3 times, but the layout kept changing. The symbols from the circular room were carved into the walls here too, glowing faintly as I ran past them. My footsteps echoed in the emptiness, but there was another sound too. Something was following me. At first, it was faint, like the soft scraping of claws against stone, but the further I ran, the louder it got. The thing wasn't rushing after me. It was stalking me, its pace deliberate. I could hear its claws dragging along the walls, carving deep grooves into the stone. Every now and then, I'd hear that guttural, static-like growl, low and taunting. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were about to give out. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I rounded another corner and found myself in a massive, open room. It was a chapel, or at least it used to be. The walls were lined with broken, stained glass windows, the colored shards scattered across the floor like jagged teeth. At the far end of the room was an altar, and behind it, a massive wooden door. It looked old, ancient even, with strange carvings etched into its surface. I didn't have time to think. I sprinted toward the door, slipping on the glass, but catching myself before I fell. The sound of the thing behind me grew louder, more aggressive, and I could feel its presence closing in. I reached the door and threw my weight against it, praying it wasn't locked. It wasn't. It creaked open, revealing a staircase that spiraled downward into darkness. Of course, it was down. It's always down. The stairs felt endless. They were steep and uneven, and I had to keep one hand on the damp, moss-covered wall to keep from tumbling forward. The air grew colder the deeper I went, and the smell of mildew and decay was almost unbearable. Somewhere above me, I could still hear the thing's claws on the stone, growing fainter but not disappearing entirely. It was toying with me, letting me think I was getting away. But I wasn't. I knew that. After what felt like hours, I reached the bottom. The staircase opened up into another room, but this one was different. It was smaller, more confined, with walls that seemed to close in the longer I stared at them. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on the pedestal was a map. I hesitated. It looked like the same map I'd seen on the website, the one with the red dots scattered across the Balkans, but this one was different. The dots weren't just markings, they were glowing, pulsing faintly, like the spiral in the monastery. And they weren't stationary either, they were moving. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat as I realized what I was looking at. The dots weren't just locations, they were beings. Each one moved with purpose, like it was searching for something or someone. One of the dots was brighter than the others, its glow almost blinding. It was moving toward a small, isolated mark near the Rila Monastery, toward me. My vision blurred as a wave of nausea hit me. I reached out to steady myself on the pedestal, but the moment my hand touched the map, the glow intensified. The walls of the room began to shift, the carvings on them twisting into new shapes, spirals within spirals. patterns that seemed to burn themselves into my mind. I couldn't look away, even as my eyes stung and my head throbbed. Then I heard it, a voice, not the guttural growl from before, but something softer, female. It whispered directly into my ear, though there was no one else in the room. "You're part of the pattern now." The pedestal began to sink into the ground, taking the map with it. The walls closed in further, and the air grew colder. I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, their light blinding. And then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went dark. I woke up outside, lying face down in the snow. My clothes were soaked, and my skin felt like ice. The monastery was gone, not just out of sight, gone, like it had never been there. I stumbled to my feet, my head spinning. The mountains around me were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels alive. I reached for my phone, hoping to call for help, but it wasn't in my pocket. Neither was my wallet or anything else I'd brought with me. As I turned in circles, trying to figure out where the hell I was, I noticed something in the snow. Footprints. They weren't mine. They were massive, inhuman, with long clawed toes. They led away from where I'd been lying, disappearing into the forest. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at those tracks, but eventually I started walking, not toward the footprints, away from them, back towards civilization, or whatever was left of it. But even as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was still watching me, waiting. When I started walking, I thought it'd just be for a few minutes, long enough to find a road, a sign, something, but the forest swallowed me whole. I don't even remember leaving the clearing where I woke up. One moment, I was standing there, staring at those clawed footprints, and the next, I was surrounded by trees so dense I couldn't see the sky. The air was thick, damp, and colder than before, making it hard to breathe. Every step felt like wading through quicksand, my boots sinking into the snow and mud. It wasn't just the cold that got to me. It was the silence. Not the kind of silence you get in a quiet neighborhood or library, but something unnatural, like the forest itself was holding its breath. No birds, no wind, not even the sound of my own footsteps felt real. It was like walking through a muted dream, but the terror gnawing at the edges of my mind reminded me this was no dream. I kept my eyes on the ground, following what I thought were faint trails in the snow. The clawed footprints had vanished, probably a blessing, since I didn't want to know where they led. But every so often, I'd notice odd shapes in the snow. Perfect circles, like someone had pressed the end of a pipe into the ground. They were scattered, seemingly random, but I couldn't help but feel they were marking something. Some kind of invisible boundary. That's when I started hearing the whispers. At first, they were faint, blending with the ringing in my ears from the cold. I thought maybe it was the wind finally picking up, but then I realized there wasn't any wind. The trees were completely still, their branches heavy with unmoving snow. And the whispers weren't coming from any single direction. They were everywhere, surrounding me, threading through the spaces between the trees. Words I couldn't understand. Words I didn't want to understand. Don't look. It sees. It knows. I froze in place, my breath clouding in the frigid air. My eyes darted between the trees, searching for anything, anyone, but the forest was empty. At least, it looked empty. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat, and my legs screamed at me to move, to run, but I didn't. I couldn't. and then the sound changed. It wasn't whispers anymore. It was laughter. Not the kind of laughter you hear from a friend cracking a joke. No, this was something else entirely. It was distorted, echoing, bouncing off the trees like it was coming from 1,000 mouths at once. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. The pitch kept shifting, high and shrill one moment, then deep and guttural the next. My knees buckled and I fell to the ground, my hands sinking into the freezing snow. That's when I saw it. Not ahead of me, not even near me. It was in my peripheral vision, just barely visible through the gaps between the trees. A figure, impossibly tall, with limbs too long and thin to belong to anything natural. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and even though I couldn't make out its face, I knew it was looking at me. The whispers returned, louder this time, almost deafening. They overlapped, repeating the same words over and over again in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. My hands instinctively went to my ears, trying to block it out, but the sound wasn't coming from outside my head. It was inside it. You're part of the pattern now. I don't remember how long I stayed there, crouched in the snow, but eventually the whispers faded. The laughter stopped. When I dared to look up, the figure was gone. The forest was quiet again, but the damage was done. I wasn't alone out here, not really, and I wasn't going to escape. Somehow, my legs started moving again, carrying me deeper into the trees. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stop. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a flash of movement, a shadow that disappeared the moment I turned my head, but nothing approached me. Not yet. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon something that made my stomach drop. It was a cabin. At least, that's what it looked like at first glance. It was small and ramshackle, its wooden walls warped and blackened with age. The windows were shattered, and the door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the still air. But what really caught my attention were the markings. The same spirals and symbols from the monastery were carved into the wood, some of them so deep they'd split the planks. They pulsed faintly, the glow barely visible in the dim light of the forest. I didn't want to go inside. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay away, but I couldn't just keep wandering aimlessly. If there was any chance of finding answers, they were in there. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped inside. The interior was even worse than the outside, dark, cramped, and reeking of rot. The air was thick with dust, and cobwebs clung to every surface. In the corner of the room was a table, and on the table was something that made my blood run cold. It was the map. The same map I'd seen in the monastery. The same glowing red dots, moving and shifting like living things. But this time, there was something new. A black dot, larger than the others, had appeared. It wasn't moving. It was pulsing, and it was right where I was standing. The door slammed shut behind me, and the cabin was plunged into total darkness. I spun around, my hands fumbling for the handle, but it was gone. The door wasn't there anymore. Neither were the windows. The room had changed, its walls closing in, the symbols on them glowing brighter. The whispers were back, louder than ever, overlapping into a cacophony of madness. You're part of the pattern now. The words echoed over and over, drilling into my skull. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, but it didn't help. The room was spinning, the symbols shifting, rearranging themselves into shapes that made my eyes burn. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I saw faces in the walls, dozens of them, human faces, their mouths open in silent screams. And then I heard the door creak open again. I didn't want to look. I knew what I'd see, but I couldn't stop myself. Standing in the doorway was the same figure from the forest. Its elongated limbs barely fit through the frame, and its head scraped against the ceiling as it stepped inside. The room seemed to darken around it, the glow of the symbols dimming as if they were afraid of it. It moved slowly, deliberately, its black eyes locked onto mine. I tried to crawl away, but my body wouldn't respond. I was frozen, paralyzed by its gaze. It reached out one long, bony hand, its fingers curling around my wrist. Its touch was ice cold, sending a jolt of pain up my arm, and then it leaned in, its face inches from mine. For the first time, it spoke. "The map isn't for you." Its voice wasn't loud, but it vibrated through my entire body, shaking me to my core. The walls of the cabin began to crumble, the symbols flickering and fading. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the figure's face splitting open, revealing a gaping void filled with rows of jagged, glistening teeth. I woke up in the forest again, lying in the snow. The cabin was gone, and so was the map. But the clawed footprints were back, circling where I'd been lying. And this time, they didn't lead away. They led toward me. When I opened my eyes, the snow wasn't just cold anymore. It burned. My entire body felt like it was being pressed into the earth by something invisible, something heavy and alive. The clawed footprints encircling me seemed to vibrate, like they were humming with energy, and for a moment, I thought I could hear them whispering. The whispers were different this time. They weren't words, they were numbers, strings of them, endless and overlapping, weaving into each other until they became something else entirely. Something alive. I sat up, my vision spinning, and realized the numbers weren't just in my head. They were on me. Glowing spirals and numbers ran across my arms, pulsing under my skin like veins. My heartbeat synced with them, the rhythm foreign, unnatural. I tried to wipe them off, scratching at my skin until it bled, but the markings didn't fade. They only grew brighter. The snow beneath me began to shift, melting in perfect circles around me, revealing the dark, frozen ground underneath. And then I heard it again, the laughter, that distorted, echoing laughter. It wasn't far now. It was close, closer than it had ever been. I scrambled to my feet, looking around wildly, but the forest didn't look the same anymore. The trees were too tall, their trunks bending at impossible angles, twisting toward me like they were reaching out. Their shadows stretched across the ground, forming patterns I recognized, but didn't want to. The spirals, the triangles, the markings that had followed me since the monastery. I didn't know where I was going anymore. My legs were moving on their own, dragging me deeper into the forest. The clawed footprints were everywhere now, overlapping and crisscrossing, like some kind of demented trail. But they weren't leading away from me. They were leading toward something, toward it. I don't know how long I walked. Hours, maybe. Days. Time didn't exist in that forest. The cold didn't feel cold anymore, and the hunger gnawing at my stomach felt distant, irrelevant. The spirals under my skin burned brighter with every step, like they were pulling me forward, guiding me to something I didn't want to find. The laughter grew louder, echoing off the trees until it was all I could hear. And then, suddenly, it stopped. I stumbled into a clearing and froze. At the center of the clearing was a massive spiral burned into the earth, so large it stretched across the entire space. The snow around it was untouched, perfectly white, but the spiral was black, charred, and still smoking, as though it had just been burned. Symbols lined the edges of the spiral, glowing faintly like dying embers, and in the center of it all was a figure. It wasn't the tall, stitched-together thing I'd seen before. This one was different. It was smaller, hunched over, its back turned to me. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, but it wasn't alien. It was human. Or at least, it had been. I recognized the red Adidas hoodie, torn and bloodied, hanging loosely over its skeletal frame. "Jake?" I croaked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The figure twitched, its head jerking slightly at the sound of my voice. It didn't turn around. It just sat there, hunched in the center of the spiral, rocking back and forth, like a child trying to comfort themselves. "Jake, it's me," I said, stepping closer, despite every instinct screaming at me to run. What happened to you?" As I got closer, I noticed something in his hands. He was holding something, no, cradling it. It looked like a piece of metal, jagged and sharp, with symbols etched into its surface. The same symbols that were carved into the monastery walls, that had burned themselves into my skin. His fingers were stained black, oozing some kind of thick, tar-like substance that dripped onto the spiral beneath him. And then he spoke. "It's not a map." His voice was barely audible, but it cut through the silence like a knife. I stopped in my tracks, my entire body trembling. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Jake, what the hell is going on?" "It's not a map," he repeated, louder this time. His head jerked again, snapping to one side, like a broken marionette. "It's a doorway." Before I could respond, he lifted his head, and I saw his face. It wasn't Jake anymore. His eyes were gone, replaced by black, empty voids that seemed to suck in the light around them. His skin was cracked and peeling, revealing raw, pulsating flesh underneath. And his mouth, oh God, his mouth was stretched into a grin so wide it split his cheeks, black liquid pouring from the corners. "It's a doorway," he said again, his voice overlapping with that guttural, inhuman growl I'd heard before. "And you opened it." The ground beneath me began to shake. The spiral burned brighter, its glow blinding, and the symbols around the edges started to shift, twisting into new patterns. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of burning flesh and metal. I tried to move, to run, but the markings on my skin burned so hot, I thought they were going to sear me alive. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air. Jake, or whatever he'd become, stood up slowly, his movements jerky and unnatural. He turned to face me fully, and for the first time, I realized what he was holding. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was part of the spiral, a shard of it, like it had been broken off, pulsing faintly in his hands. "You were never supposed to see it," he said, his voice layered with dozens of others. "But now, you're part of it. You're part of us." And then he plunged the shard into his chest. The spiral exploded with light, so bright it felt like it was tearing through my skull. I screamed, but no sound came out. The ground beneath me split open, and I felt myself falling, tumbling into an endless void. The whispers were deafening now, screaming numbers and symbols into my head until I thought my brain was going to split apart. When I woke up, I was in my apartment. The transition was so sudden, so jarring. I thought for a moment I'd hallucinated everything. but the markings on my skin were still there, faint but visible, like scars. My phone sat on the coffee table in front of me, buzzing incessantly with notifications. I reached for it with trembling hands and unlocked the screen. The map was there, glowing, pulsing. The black dot that had marked the Rila Monastery was gone, but a new one had appeared. This time, it wasn't in the Balkans. It was in my city, and it was moving. I don't sleep anymore. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see the spiral. I hear the whispers. I feel it watching me. The map updates every night. New dots appearing. New pathways forming. It's not just a map. It's a network. A system. A pattern. And now I'm part of it. If you're reading this, stay away from the map. Stay away from the monastery. Because once you're in the pattern, there's no way out. And it's coming for you next. I bought a limited edition Santa hat from the dark web. When I put it on, my reflection in the mirror didn't smile back. So, I'm not really the kind of guy who messes around on the dark web. I've heard all the stories about people buying cursed objects, sketchy human experiments, or worse. But honestly, I'm just a dude who's easily bored. This time of year always gets to me. Something about Christmas feels fake, like it's less about holiday cheer and more about how many people can max out their credit cards at Walmart. I guess I just wanted to do something different this year, something that felt unique, or at least not completely corporate. That's how it started. I was scrolling TikTok late one night, probably way too late, because when you start seeing top 10 weirdest things found on the dark web videos, you know your sleep schedule is toast. Anyway, one of the clips mentioned this subreddit where people share their dark web holes. Most of it seemed dumb, like who's actually spending money on a supposed haunted Furby? But then, someone posted about this Christmas gear collection, limited edition ornaments, creepy hand-carved nutcrackers, stuff like that. The comments kept mentioning this seller who had exclusive holiday items you can't find anywhere else. And yeah, I'll admit it, I was intrigued. So, curiosity got the better of me, and I did a deep dive. A few YouTube tutorials and a sketchy browser later, I was browsing this weirdly festive dark web page called Silent Night Emporium. It looked like something from 2004. Super basic layout, no modern design. But the products, they were next level bizarre. Holiday spirit jars that were supposedly filled with the essence of Christmas. Stockings made from reclaimed materials. Don't ask me what they meant by that. And then there it was, the Santa hat. It was listed as limited edition Santa hat, vintage, one of a kind, brimming with holiday cheer. The description was what sold me, though. It claimed that the hat wasn't just a collector's item, it was an experience. There was some cheesy stuff about unlocking the true spirit of the season and seeing yourself as you've never seen before. It sounded gimmicky as hell, but for $25? Why not? I've spent more on dumber stuff at Starbucks. The hat arrived 2 days later, which, for something ordered off the dark web, was faster than Amazon Prime. It came in this plain brown box, no logo, no return address, just my name scribbled in handwriting that looked like a toddler with a crayon wrote it. When I opened it, I was honestly kind of underwhelmed. The hat looked normal, like dollar store normal. Red velvet, a fluffy white trim, and one of those poofy cotton balls at the tip. If you saw it at Target, you wouldn't even blink. But there was this smell. It wasn't bad exactly, but it was weirdly specific, like cinnamon, pine, and something metallic, almost like pennies. That should have been my first red flag, but I just figured it was some cheap gimmick to make it vintage. I didn't think much of it until I tried it on. That's when everything got weird. It started small. I stood in front of my mirror, admiring how ridiculous I looked in this cheap Santa hat. But then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My reflection. It didn't move. I swear to God. I tilted my head to the side, but the version of me in the mirror didn't. It just stood there, staring at me with this blank expression. I yanked the hat off immediately, and just like that, the reflection snapped back to normal, like nothing had happened. I laughed it off at first. I mean, maybe I was just sleep deprived or something. But as the night went on, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept catching myself glancing at the mirror, half expecting my reflection to just wave or something. I even Googled dark web cursed Santa hat, but all I found were those lame creepypasta stories where people end up possessed or dragged to hell. That wasn't gonna happen to me, right? The next morning, things got worse. My roommate, Jake, noticed the hat sitting on the kitchen counter and asked where I got it. I told him about the dark web, expecting him to laugh or call me an idiot, but instead he just stared at it. His face went pale, and he backed up like the thing was radioactive. "Dude," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "where the hell did you really get this?" "I told you, the dark web." "Why?" Jake shook his head. I don't know, man. It's just, my grandma had a hat like that when I was a kid. She said it was cursed. She used to tell me never to wear it, no matter what. Now, Jake's not the kind of guy who gets freaked out easily. He's the guy who loves haunted houses, urban exploration, all that. So seeing him genuinely rattled, that was new. I tried to brush it off again, told him it was probably just a coincidence. But later that night, I started noticing other things. The smell from the hat had spread. My whole apartment smelled like that weird mix of cinnamon, pine, and pennies. And then there were the sounds. I don't even know how to explain it. It started as this faint jingling, like sleigh bells, but it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the apartment. Every time I turned my head to listen, it stopped, like it knew I was trying to catch it. By midnight, I was so freaked out that I decided to put the hat back on, just to see if it would stop. Big mistake. When I put the hat on again, it felt heavy. Not physically, but like there was this pressure in the air, this invisible weight pressing down on my chest. I walked to the mirror, half expecting my reflection to go haywire again, but this time it smiled at me. I didn't smile. I swear I didn't. But my reflection did, this big, unnatural grin that stretched way too wide. Its teeth didn't even look like mine. They were sharper, almost animal-like. And its eyes. I don't even want to think about its eyes. They weren't mine. They couldn't be. I ripped the hat off and threw it across the room. My reflection didn't move for a full 10 seconds after I did. It just stood there, grinning like it was waiting for something. Then, slowly, it raised a hand and waved. "I'm posting this here because I don't know what to do." The hat is still sitting in the corner of my room, and I swear it's watching me. Jake said he's crashing at his girlfriend's place until I burn that damn thing, but I'm scared to even touch it again. The smell is getting worse, and the jingling hasn't stopped. Every time I look in the mirror, I feel like something's watching me from the other side, waiting for me to put the hat back on. I haven't slept in 2 days. And the worst part? My reflection doesn't just smile anymore. It talks. That night, I did everything I could to avoid looking at mirrors, or anything remotely reflective, really. I even threw a towel over the bathroom mirror and unplugged the TV, just in case. But it didn't help. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just in the mirrors anymore. The first weird thing? My phone screen. I was lying in bed, doom scrolling Instagram, like I usually do to distract myself from life, when I noticed my front-facing camera glitching. At first, I thought it was just a lag or bad lighting, those weird shadowy distortions you get when you're sitting in a dimly lit room. But then I noticed it wasn't lagging. My reflection was sitting still, completely motionless, while I kept scrolling. I waved my hand in front of the camera just to see if it would sync up. It didn't. The reflection just stared at me, and then it winked. I dropped my phone like it was on fire. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching me, even with the screen face down on my blanket. That stupid Santa hat was still in the corner of the room too, like it was mocking me. It hadn't moved, not physically at least, but the air around it felt wrong, heavy, like it was sucking the life out of the room. I decided to call Jake. He had always been my rational friend, the guy who talked me down when I got too deep into conspiracy theories or YouTube rabbit holes. But when I called, it went straight to voicemail. Weird, because he's always glued to his phone. I left him a message, trying to keep my voice calm, but it cracked halfway through. Hey man, I think there's something wrong with the hat. Call me back when you get this, okay? I didn't get an answer, but about 10 minutes later, I got a text. It wasn't from Jake's number though. It came from an unknown sender, and all it said was, "You shouldn't have put it on." I wish I could say I didn't sleep that night, but honestly, exhaustion took over. I don't even remember closing my eyes, but what I do remember is the dream, or whatever it was that happened while I was out. It wasn't like any dream I'd ever had before. It felt real, too real. I was standing in my living room, staring at the hat, only it wasn't the hat anymore. It had changed. The red velvet was darker, almost black, and the white trim was matted and stained. The metallic smell was stronger, like old blood. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. My legs felt glued to the floor. Then, from the shadows of the room, I saw movement. Something stepped forward, something wearing the hat. At first, I thought it was me, like my reflection had come to life. But as it got closer, I realized it wasn't me at all. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, with veins spiderwebbing across its face. Its mouth stretched into a grin so wide it looked like it was splitting its face in half. And its eyes weren't human. They were pitch black, with tiny pinpricks of red light where pupils should have been. "You invited me," it whispered, its voice a low, guttural rasp that felt like it was coming from inside my own head. "You wore the hat. Now we're one." I woke up screaming. My throat was raw, my body drenched in sweat. For a second, I thought it was just a nightmare, but then I smelled it. The cinnamon, pine, and pennies, stronger than ever. And the hat, it wasn't in the corner of the room anymore. It was on my bed. The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay in the apartment anymore. I stuffed the hat into a plastic bag and shoved it into the closet, then threw on a hoodie and bolted out the door. I didn't have a plan, but I needed to get out of there. I ended up at the Starbucks down the street, mostly because it was crowded and felt safer than being alone. I ordered a coffee, sat in the farthest corner I could find, and tried to calm down. But even in public, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. People were staring at me, not just quick glances either, full-on staring, like they were trying to figure out if they recognized me. One guy, this middle-aged dude in a suit, walked right up to my table and just stood there. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, like he wasn't fully awake. "Do I know you?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head to the side, like a curious dog, and whispered, "You're wearing it, aren't you?" My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" He didn't respond. He just smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched way too far, and walked out of the Starbucks without another word. When I got back to my apartment, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It had spread to the hallway now, leaking out under my door. I braced myself, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The entire apartment was trashed, furniture overturned, picture frames shattered. Even the walls were scratched up, like someone had taken a knife to them. But the worst part, every mirror in the place was smashed, every single one. Shards of glass littered the floor, reflecting the dim light like tiny, jagged teeth. And then I saw it. The hat was back in the corner of the room, perfectly placed, like it hadn't moved at all. But next to it, written on the wall in what I can only pray was red paint, were the words, "Reflections don't lie." I wanted to run, to leave everything behind and never come back. But before I could move, my phone buzzed. It was another text from that same unknown number. This time, it said, "Look in the mirror." I didn't want to. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to throw my phone across the room and get the hell out of there. But something compelled me to look. I turned toward the nearest shard of glass on the floor and froze. It wasn't me staring back. The thing in the reflection had my face, my clothes, my messy hair, but its eyes were black, just like in the dream. And it was smiling, not a normal smile. That smile, too wide, too sharp. It raised a hand, slowly, and pointed at the closet, where the hat was supposed to be. But when I turned to look, the closet door was already open, and the hat, it wasn't inside anymore. Something was, and it was breathing. I didn't want to look. I couldn't look, but the sound of breathing from the closet, it was slow, wet, and ragged, made it impossible to ignore. It wasn't like human breathing. It had a rhythm that was just off, like someone trying to mimic the sound, but not quite getting it right. My body felt frozen, like my muscles had turned to cement, but my brain was screaming at me to run, to get the hell out of the apartment before it was too late. But then it spoke. "I know you're there," the voice said. Except it wasn't just a voice. It was my voice, twisted, warped, but unmistakably mine. "Aren't you going to say hello?" I don't know how I managed to move, but I did. Slowly, I turned my head toward the closet. The door was wide open now, the darkness inside so deep it looked like the back of the closet had disappeared entirely. The Santa hat wasn't on the shelf where I'd shoved it. It was on the floor, just barely visible in the shadows. And behind it, crouched so low it looked almost insect-like, was me. Or at least, something that looked like me. Its limbs were all wrong, too long, too thin, like they'd been stretched out. Its skin was pale and waxy, almost translucent, and its hair hung in damp, stringy clumps. But the worst part was its face. It was my face, but distorted, like someone had tried to sculpt it out of clay and melted it halfway through. The grin was still there, impossibly wide, and its black eyes glistened in the dark like oil slicks. "Why don't you come closer?" it said, still using my voice. Its head tilted to the side, just like the man at Starbucks. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare as it started to crawl out of the closet, its joints cracking with every movement. The way it moved was wrong, like a marionette being yanked along by invisible strings. It reached for the hat, long fingers curling around it like claws, and held it up to me. "Put it back on," it whispered, its grin widening. "You don't want to disappoint me, do you?" I bolted. I didn't even think. I just ran. Out of the apartment, down the hallway, and into the stairwell. I could hear it behind me, those heavy, uneven footsteps echoing in the distance, but I didn't dare look back. By the time I made it outside, I was gasping for air, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. But I wasn't safe yet. The streets were eerily empty, like the entire city had decided to take the night off. No cars, no people, just the distant hum of streetlights and the occasional gust of wind. I didn't know where to go, so I just kept walking, my hands stuffed into my hoodie pockets to stop them from shaking. I ended up at a 24-hour McDonald's, figuring it was as good a place as any to hide. At least there'd be people there. Except there weren't. The parking lot was empty, and when I walked inside, the place was completely silent. The lights were on, the fryer was humming, and there were trays of food sitting out on the counter like someone had just abandoned them mid-shift. But there wasn't a single employee in sight. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the tiled walls. No response. I walked up to the counter, my footsteps sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Is anyone here?" And then, from the back of the kitchen, I heard it again. The jingling. It was faint at first, like someone gently shaking a handful of sleigh bells. But it got louder, closer. And this time, it wasn't alone. There was something else. A low, guttural growl that made my skin crawl. I backed away, my eyes darting around the room for an exit. But before I could move, the lights flickered and went out. For a moment, everything was pitch black. And then, in the faint glow of the emergency exit sign, I saw them. Reflections. They were everywhere. On the windows, the shiny metal counters, even the glossy surface of the floor. Dozens of versions of me, staring at me with those same black eyes and grinning, their teeth glinting in the dim light. They moved in unison, tilting their heads to the side like they were mocking me. "Why are you running?" one of them said, its voice echoing all around me. "You invited us, remember?" I stumbled backward, tripping over one of the chairs and falling hard onto the floor. My phone slipped out of my pocket, skidding across the tiles, and as I scrambled to grab it, the screen lit up with a new message. "No one escapes." I didn't have time to process it. The reflections started to move, stepping out of their mirrored prisons like water spilling over the edge of a glass. Their bodies shimmered and warped as they emerged, their features shifting between mine and something else, something monstrous. I grabbed my phone and bolted for the emergency exit, slamming into the door with enough force to make my shoulder throb. It burst open, spilling me out into the alley behind the building. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block, my lungs burning and my legs threatening to give out. I ducked into an abandoned gas station, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. I tried calling Jake again, but this time the call didn't even ring. Instead, It went straight to a voicemail I didn't recognize. "You're too late," the voice on the other end said. It wasn't Jake. It wasn't me. It was something else entirely. Something cold and empty. "The hat belongs to us now. And so do you." The call ended. The line went dead. And when I looked up, I realized I wasn't alone in the gas station anymore. It was there. The thing from the closet. It was standing in the aisle, holding the Santa hat in one hand and pointing at me with the other. Its grin stretched even wider, splitting its face almost in two, and its black eyes seemed to swallow the room. "You can't run," it said, its voice echoing in my head. "You can't hide. Put it on." And then, before I could even think to move, it lunged. I don't remember how I got away. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I'm still running, trapped in some twisted nightmare I can't wake up from. All I know is, when I came to, I was back in my apartment. The hat was on the table in front of me, perfectly clean, perfectly ordinary, like nothing had happened. But I know better now. It's not just a hat. It's a door, and whatever I let in that night, it's still here, watching, waiting, and every time I look in the mirror, I see it, smiling. When I woke up, I wasn't sure if it was morning or night. The blinds were drawn, and the light in my apartment had taken on this gray, suffocating quality, like a storm was brewing, except it was inside. The air felt heavy, almost humid, and that smell, cinnamon, pine, and pennies, had become so overwhelming it made my stomach churn. For a brief moment, I thought maybe it had all been a bad dream, that the hat, the reflections, all of it was just some feverish nightmare born from my stupid curiosity. But then I saw it, the Santa hat, sitting in the middle of my kitchen table, perfectly folded like a gift waiting to be unwrapped. Except now, there was something else. A photo. Polaroid, to be specific. It was tucked neatly under the brim of the hat, its glossy surface catching the dim light. I didn't want to touch it, but my hands moved on their own, trembling as I picked it up. My heart stopped when I saw what was in the picture. It was me, but not just me. It was my corpse. The image was vivid, hyper-realistic, like it had been taken with one of those high-resolution cameras people use for crime scene photos. My body was sprawled on the floor of my apartment, limbs twisted at unnatural angles. My face was frozen in a look of pure terror, my mouth gaping in a silent scream, and my eyes, they were missing. Just two black, gaping holes staring into nothingness. Scrawled in red ink across the bottom of the photo were the words, "This is your future." I don't remember dropping the photo, but I must have, because when I looked down, it was lying face up on the floor next to my feet. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold on to the edge of the table as I tried to steady myself. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight, and my thoughts were racing so fast I couldn't keep up with them. The logical part of my brain, the part that had been clinging to the hope that this was all some elaborate prank or hallucination, was gone now. There was no logic left, just fear. And then my phone buzzed. It was a text from that same unknown number. This time, it wasn't cryptic. It was a simple, 3-word command that made my blood turn to ice. "Check the bathroom." I didn't want to. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to leave, to get as far away from that apartment as possible. But something about the message compelled me to move, like an invisible force was pulling me forward. My legs felt heavy as I made my way down the hallway, the faint jingling of sleigh bells echoing in the distance. When I reached the bathroom door, I hesitated. my hand hovering over the doorknob. The smell was stronger here, almost suffocating. I pushed the door open. The first thing I noticed was the mirror, or rather, what was left of it. The towel I'd thrown over it was gone, and the glass was completely shattered, shards scattered across the sink and floor like broken teeth. But in the center of the mirror, where the largest piece of glass was still intact, there was a message. It wasn't written in ink or blood or anything like that. It was scratched into the surface of the glass, deep and jagged, the letters uneven but unmistakable. Put it on. Behind me, in the reflection, I saw movement. I turned around so fast I nearly slipped on the glass, but there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway, dimly lit by the flickering bulb in the ceiling. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst, and my hands felt cold and clammy as I backed out of the bathroom, my eyes darting around the apartment like I was expecting something to jump out at me. That's when I heard the voice. "You can't escape," it whispered, low and guttural, like it was coming from inside the walls. "You can run, you can hide, but you'll never be free. Not until you wear it." The sound of laughter followed, echoing through the apartment. It wasn't just one voice. It was dozens, overlapping and distorted, like a choir of nightmares. I stumbled back into the living room, my foot catching on the edge of the rug and sending me sprawling to the floor. When I looked up, the Santa hat was sitting on the couch now, perfectly positioned, like it had been waiting for me. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing my keys and phone from the coffee table as I bolted for the door. My fingers fumbled with the lock, the metal cold and slick under my sweaty palms, but I finally managed to get it open. I ran out into the hallway, not even bothering to close the door behind me, and sprinted for the stairs. When I hit the street, the city looked different. It was still eerily empty, like before, but now it felt wrong in a way I couldn't quite explain. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows, and the buildings seemed taller, leaning in toward me like they were watching. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of pine and pennies, and the faint sound of sleigh bells followed me no matter which direction I went. I ended up at the park near my apartment, collapsing onto a bench as I tried to catch my breath. My phone buzzed again, but this time I didn't want to look. I was too afraid of what I might see. But when the buzzing didn't stop, I finally gave in and pulled it out of my pocket. There was a video message waiting for me. My thumb hovered over the play button, my heart racing, as I debated whether or not to open it. Part of me wanted to throw the phone into the nearest trash can and forget it ever existed. But another part of me, some sick, twisted part, had to know. I tapped the screen. The video started with static, the kind you'd see on an old VHS tape. Then, slowly, the image came into focus. It was my apartment. The camera was shaking, like whoever was filming was holding it in unsteady hands, and it was moving toward the living room, toward the couch. The Santa hat was sitting there, exactly as I'd left it. But then, the camera panned to the right, and I saw myself, sitting on the floor, my back against the wall, staring blankly ahead with empty black eyes. My mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. The camera zoomed in on my face, and suddenly, the audio kicked in. A voice, my voice, started to speak, low and distorted. "You can't hide from yourself," it said. "You can't hide from us. We see you. We are you." The screen went black, and then a final message appeared, written in bold white letters. "It's already too late." I don't know how long I sat there, staring at my phone, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped it. The park was dead silent now, the world around me frozen in place. And then slowly, I felt it, the weight, on my head. I reached up, my fingers brushing against something soft and fuzzy. My stomach dropped as I realized what it was. The Santa hat. I hadn't put it on, I hadn't even touched it. But somehow, it was there, sitting on my head, snug and warm, like it belonged there. And when I looked down at my phone screen, I didn't see my reflection anymore. I saw it, smiling, waiting, watching, and then it spoke. Now we're one. When the hat settled on my head, I felt something shift, not physically, but inside, like a part of me had been unlocked, ripped open, and filled with something that didn't belong. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. They were tangled, chaotic, and laced with whispers that didn't stop, even when I clamped my hands over my ears. At first, I thought the whispers were coming from outside, from the park, the shadows, the trees, but then I realized they weren't coming from anywhere around me. They were coming from inside my head. "You belong to us now," one of them hissed, its voice sharp and cold, like the edge of a knife. "We've been waiting for so long." I stumbled off the bench, clawing at the hat, trying to rip it off. My fingers slipped against the fabric, which felt strangely wet and sticky now, like it had been soaked in something. But no matter how hard I pulled, it wouldn't budge. It was like it had fused to my skull. The whispers turned into laughter, dozens of voices, overlapping, echoing, mocking me. And then I saw them. They were everywhere. The park was filled with shadows, but they weren't just shadows anymore. They were moving, crawling, stretching toward me with elongated limbs that bent and twisted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Their eyes, if you could even call them that, were empty black voids, the same as the reflections that had haunted me before. And their mouths, they all had that same horrifying grin, impossibly wide, teeth gleaming in the faint light like shards of broken glass. I backed away, my legs trembling so badly I could barely stay upright. But no matter where I turned, they were there, behind the trees, lurking in the playground, crawling across the grass, like predators stalking their prey. And the closer they got, the louder the whispers became. "Don't fight it," they said, their voices overlapping in a sickening chorus. "You're one of us now." I don't know how I made it back to my apartment. Everything after the park was a blur of running, screaming, and choking on that metallic smell that seemed to follow me everywhere. When I finally slammed the door shut behind me, I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. My vision was swimming, and my body felt like it was on fire, every nerve screaming in protest. But the hat was still there, still on me. And then I saw the mirror. It wasn't broken anymore. Somehow, in the time I'd been gone, the shards had pieced themselves back together. The cracks were gone, the glass perfectly smooth, as if it had never been shattered in the first place. But the reflection staring back at me wasn't me. It was the thing from the closet. Its grin was wider now, stretching across its entire face like a crescent moon. Its eyes were darker, emptier, but they gleamed with a malevolent light that made my stomach churn. And its hands, they were pressed against the other side of the glass, clawing at the surface like it was trying to break through. "You can't hide from me," it said, its voice low and guttural. "I am you." I staggered back, but the reflection didn't move. It just stood there, grinning, watching, and then, slowly, it started to change. Its face shifted, distorted, twisting into something unrecognizable. Its skin turned gray and mottled, its features stretching and warping until it didn't even look human anymore. But the hat stayed the same. I don't know what came over me, but I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a lamp, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered, shards flying in every direction, but the reflection didn't disappear. Instead, it spread, multiplying across every reflective surface in the room. The windows, the TV screen, even the shiny metal of the faucet. They all showed the same distorted, grinning figure, staring at me from every angle. "You can't break us," the voices said, their laughter echoing in my ears. "We're everywhere. We're inside you now." That's when I lost it. I started smashing everything, every mirror, every window, every piece of glass I could find. I didn't care about the cuts on my hands or the blood dripping onto the floor. I just wanted it to stop. But no matter how many reflections I destroyed, they kept coming back. Every surface I shattered seemed to repair itself the moment I looked away, the reflections growing darker, more twisted, more alive. And then the phone rang. I froze. It was the old landline I never used, the one I hadn't even realized was still plugged in. The sound was shrill, piercing, cutting through the cacophony of whispers like a knife. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe desperation, made me pick it up. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice trembling. There was a pause, and then a voice on the other end, a voice I recognized. "Why are you running?" it said. It was me, my voice, but cold and empty, devoid of any emotion. "You know you can't escape." "Who are you?" I shouted, my grip tightening on the receiver. "What do you want from me?" The voice laughed, low and guttural. "We don't want anything from you. We are you. Every thought, every fear, every shadow inside your mind. We've been here all along. The hat just opened the door." I dropped the phone, the sound of the laughter still echoing in my ears. The room felt like it was spinning, the walls closing in around me. And then I saw it, the hat, sitting in the center of the room, perfectly still, perfectly ordinary. But this time, it wasn't alone. There were figures standing around it now, shadowy, distorted shapes that flickered in and out of existence, like static on a broken TV. Their eyes were black, their grins wide, and they were all wearing identical Santa hats. One by one, they turned to face me, their movements slow and deliberate. "Join us," they said in unison, their voices blending into a single guttural growl. "It's already too late." I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. My legs felt like they were anchored to the floor, my arms heavy and useless at my sides. The shadows began to close in, their grins widening, their laughter growing louder and louder until it was all I could hear. And then one of them stepped forward. It was me, or at least it looked like me, twisted, distorted, but unmistakably me. It reached out, its fingers long and claw-like, and placed the hat back on my head. The moment it touched me, the world went dark. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke up, everything was quiet. The apartment was empty, the air still and suffocating. But I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel them, in the walls, in the mirrors, in my mind. The whispers were still there, faint but constant, like the hum of a broken radio that never turns off. And when I looked in the mirror, because of course the mirror was whole again, I didn't see myself anymore. I saw them, smiling, waiting. And now, when I hear the jingling of sleigh bells in the distance, I know it's not Santa coming to town. It's me. or what's left of me, and I can't stop smiling. I hacked into a dark web red room. The host was wearing a mask that looked like my face. I know I probably shouldn't even be sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest. I don't know if I'm crazy or if this really happened, but I haven't slept in 2 days, and I'm scared that I'm being watched. If anything happens to me after this post, you'll at least know why. So, to start, I'm not some stereotypical hacker or computer genius. I'm just a regular guy who works a boring office job, spends way too much time scrolling Reddit, and has an unhealthy addiction to iced coffee from Starbucks. But about 2 weeks ago, I made a decision that's going to haunt me for the rest of my life. It started out of pure curiosity, a stupid need to prove to myself that the dark web wasn't just some overhyped urban legend. I mean, come on, we've all heard the stories. The dark web is a terrifying cesspool of illegal activity. Hackers can steal your identity in seconds. Red rooms are real. I thought it was just fear-mongering, but after stumbling on a few deep-diving YouTube videos, I started to wonder how much of it was real. I'm not proud of it, but I decided to find out for myself. I downloaded Tor, the browser they always say is just for anonymity. Got myself a VPN because I wasn't completely dumb, and started browsing around. At first, it was just basic stuff. Forums selling stolen credit cards, sketchy looking marketplaces, and some really messed up photos that I won't even get into here. It was gross, but it wasn't anything like the horror stories I'd heard about. That's when I found it. A small, almost hidden forum called The Observatory. The name sounded innocent enough, right? Like some weird stargazing community. But the moment I clicked on it, I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't come back from. The homepage was black, with this eerie red text that simply said, "Curiosity is the seed of destruction. Enter at your own risk." Underneath, there was a link titled Live Experiences. At first, I thought it was just another campsite. You know the kind. But something about the phrasing threw me off. Live experiences. Why not just call it streaming? Against my better judgment, I clicked it. The page took forever to load, like it was stalling just to mess with me. When it finally opened, I found myself staring at a list of events with vague, creepy titles like The Collector's Game, Room 417, Feeding Time, and The Host's Masquerade. Each one had a countdown timer next to it. Most of them were hours or days away, but one of them, The Host's Masquerade, was set to begin in less than 15 minutes. I don't know what possessed me to click it. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was the thrill of doing something I wasn't supposed to. Either way, I clicked join. To my surprise, the site asked for a password. I groaned, thinking I'd hit a dead end, but then, out of nowhere, a chat box popped up on the bottom of the screen. The user had no name, just an icon of a white mask. "Are you looking for an invitation?" they typed. I froze. I didn't even know this was a real person. My heart was pounding as I typed back, yeah? A moment passed before they responded. "The password is your name. Your real name." I didn't even hesitate to close the browser. No way. I wasn't that stupid. But the thought kept nagging at me. How did they know I was there? Was it some kind of bluff? Some random guess to scare people off? I mean, my name isn't exactly common. It's not like I could just shrug it off as a coincidence. Before I knew it, I was back on the page, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Against every ounce of common sense I had, I typed in my full name and hit enter. The screen went black. Then the live stream started. It wasn't like the live streams you see on Twitch or YouTube. There was no host, no chat, no stupid animated emojis. Just this old, grainy footage of a room. It looked like some kind of basement with concrete walls and a single hanging light bulb swaying back and forth. The camera angle was weird, like it was mounted in the corner, looking down on the whole scene. And then I saw him. A man walked into the frame, wearing a suit and a white mask. It was blank, with no features except for eye holes and a subtle curve where the lips should have been. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring straight at the camera, at me. For a few seconds, nothing happened. I was about to close the browser, thinking it was just some bizarre performance art. But then he stepped closer to the camera, tilting his head as if he could see me. And then he reached under his mask. He pulled it off. What I saw made my stomach drop. It was me, my face, my eyes, my expression. It was like looking into a mirror, but not. There was something off about him, something almost too perfect. His face didn't look real, like it was molded out of wax or something, but the resemblance was undeniable. Before I could process what was happening, the screen glitched. It wasn't the buffering kind of glitch either. It was like something or someone was trying to stop me from watching. The stream came back on after a few seconds, but this time, the man wasn't alone. There was a second person, tied to a chair in the middle of the room, their head covered by a black hood. And that's when I saw it. The man was holding a knife. I'm gonna stop here for now, because I need to take a break. My hands are shaking, just typing this out. I don't know if I should continue watching, or if I should go to the police. But the thing is, I think they know I'm writing this. My webcam light keeps flickering, even though I turned it off hours ago. If anyone has any advice, or if you've seen something like this before, please let me know. I don't think I can do this alone. Okay, I couldn't sleep last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. My face. That twisted, wax-like version of me, staring through the screen, like he was burning my image into his memory. I know I said I was going to take a break from this, but something about it just keeps pulling me back. Like I have to figure out what this is, or maybe it's the fact that I feel like someone's watching me. Anyway, after I wrote that first part, I decided to shut everything down. My laptop, my phone, even the lights in my apartment. I figured if I cut myself off from the digital world, I'd feel safer. But it didn't help. The second I crawled into bed, I started hearing things. At first, it was subtle, just the occasional creak or pop of my old apartment. But then I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, almost rhythmic, like someone pacing right outside my bedroom door. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but when I unlocked it, my heart sank. There was a notification from an unknown number. No name, no profile picture, just a single message. Don't turn around. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I glanced at my bedroom door, which I definitely locked before going to bed. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. My eyes darted back to my phone, and before I could even think about what to do next, another message popped up. The mask doesn't lie. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat there, clutching a baseball bat I kept under my bed, just waiting for, I don't know, something, but nothing happened. By the time the sun came up, I felt like I was losing my mind. I decided I needed to figure out what was going on. That meant going back to the dark web. I know. It was the dumbest possible thing I could have done, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than just some creepy live stream. When I turned my laptop back on, the first thing I noticed was that the site was still open. I know I closed it, but there it was, like it had never left. The stream was still running, but the room was empty now. The chair was gone, the hooded figure was gone, and so was the man in the mask. It was just an empty, dimly lit basement. For a second, I thought maybe it was over, that whoever was behind this had packed up and moved on. But then, the screen glitched again, and a message appeared in bold red text. Did you like the first act? I stared at the screen, too freaked out to even type back. But apparently, they didn't need me to respond. The text disappeared, replaced by a new message. Don't worry, you're the star of the next one. That's when the video feed changed. It was no longer showing the empty basement. Instead, it switched to what looked like security camera footage of a Starbucks. My Starbucks. The one I go to every morning before work. My stomach twisted into knots as I watched the familiar baristas going about their routine, completely unaware that someone was watching them. Then I saw myself. I don't mean the man in the mask. I mean me. There I was, sitting at my usual table, near the window, scrolling through my phone like I didn't have a care in the world. My coffee cup was sitting in front of me, the same stupid drink I order every day. The footage couldn't have been more than 24 hours old. I felt like I was going to throw up. How long had they been watching me? And why? Before I could process what I was seeing, the feed switched again. This time, it was showing the interior of my apartment, my living room, my kitchen, even my bedroom. I slammed the laptop shut and started pacing the room, my mind racing. How did they get access to my cameras? Hell, how did they even know who I was? I don't have cameras in my apartment, so what the hell were they showing me? My gut told me it was a scare tactic, but it worked. I felt trapped, like I couldn't trust anything or anyone. But here's the part that really got to me. When I opened my laptop again, against all better judgment, the stream was still going. The feed was back in that basement, and the man in the mask had returned. He was holding something in his hand, something small and shiny. At first, I thought it was another knife, but as he turned it over in his fingers, I realized it wasn't a weapon. It was a key. This is yours. The red text appeared on the screen. Come and get it. I don't know why I did it, but I started typing. My fingers moved faster than my brain as I typed out a single word. Why? The man tilted his head as if he could hear me, and then he slowly raised his other hand. He was holding a photograph, a Polaroid. He brought it closer to the camera until I could make out the image. It was me, sleeping, in my bed, from the exact same angle as the footage they'd shown earlier. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. This wasn't just some random hacker messing with me. Whoever this was, they'd been in my apartment. They'd been watching me. And now they wanted me to know. The screen glitched again, and the text reappeared. Midnight. Don't be late. Before I could respond, the site crashed, leaving me staring at a blank browser window. I closed my laptop and tried to collect my thoughts. Part of me wanted to run straight to the police, but what was I supposed to tell them? That I'd hacked into a dark web red room and found a guy wearing a mask of my face? That I'd been invited to some kind of sick game at midnight? They'd probably laugh me out of the station. Still, I wasn't about to just sit there and wait. I packed a bag with whatever I could think of. a flashlight, a pocket knife, my phone, and a portable charger, and headed out. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay in my apartment. I ended up at a 24-hour McDonald's, sitting in the corner booth with my bag on the seat next to me, just waiting for midnight to come. And now I'm here, writing this. My hands are shaking so badly that it's hard to type, but I needed to document this before it's too late. Midnight is less than an hour away, and I still don't know what I'm going to do. Should I show up? Should I call the cops? Should I just run and never look back? All I know is that whoever or whatever is behind this, they're not going to stop. Not until I play their game. It's midnight. I wish I could say I had some sort of grand plan, but the truth is, I have no idea what I'm doing. Every bone in my body is screaming at me to just leave, get on a bus, a plane, hell, even a train, and vanish. But deep down, I know it's pointless. These people, this thing, whatever it is, they've already proven they can find me. Running won't change that. So here I am, sitting in my car in the middle of an empty parking lot, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles are white. The address they sent me, a random set of coordinates, brought me to an old industrial park on the edge of town. You know the kind of place. Crumbling buildings, broken windows, and graffiti everywhere. The whole area feels dead, like it's been abandoned for decades. There's no sound except for the occasional gust of wind, and even that feels wrong, like the air is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I parked far enough away that I can see the building without being seen myself. It's a warehouse, massive and looming, with a single light flickering above the entrance. There's no sign of anyone else, but that doesn't make me feel any better. If this really is some kind of setup, they're probably watching me right now. My phone buzzes in my pocket, and I nearly jump out of my skin. When I check it, there's another message from the same unknown number. "You're late." My stomach drops. I glance at the clock on my dashboard. 12:01. My hands are shaking as I type back, "I'm here." The reply comes almost instantly. "Then come in." I don't know what I was expecting when I stepped out of the car. Some kind of ambush, maybe. But the parking lot is completely silent. Every step I take echoes off the concrete, and I can feel my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The warehouse looms closer with every step, and when I reach the door, I see it slightly ajar. A sliver of dim light spills out onto the ground, flickering like a dying flame. I push the door open, and the first thing that hits me is the smell. It's metallic, sharp, and cloying, like rust mixed with something sour. Blood. My stomach churns, but I force myself to step inside. The air is thick and humid, and the only sound is the faint hum of the light bulb swaying above me. The room is empty, just a vast open space with concrete walls and a floor stained with dark, sticky patches. In the center of the room, there's a single chair, and sitting on it is a laptop. The screen is glowing, casting eerie shadows on the walls, and as I approach, I realize there's a video playing. It's me, again. This time, the footage is from earlier tonight, when I was sitting in the McDonald's. The angle is slightly off, like it was filmed from a hidden camera, but there's no mistaking it. The way I was nervously glancing around, clutching my bag like it was some kind of lifeline. It's all there. They've been following me, tracking my every move. I feel like I'm going to be sick. The video glitches, and then the screen goes black. For a moment, there's nothing. And then the red text appears. "Welcome to the game." Before I can react, the lights in the warehouse flicker, and go out, plunging me into complete darkness. My pulse is racing as I fumble for the flashlight in my bag, but just as I switch it on, I hear something. A faint, scraping sound, like metal dragging against concrete. It's coming from somewhere behind me. I whip around, shining the flashlight into the darkness, but there's nothing there. Just the empty room and the faint outline of the door I came through. My breath is coming in shallow gasps now, and I can feel the panic rising in my chest. That's when I hear it again, closer this time. A slow, deliberate scrape, followed by a low, guttural sound that sends shivers down my spine. "Who's there?" I shout, my voice cracking. My words echo back to me, but there's no reply. Just that same scraping noise, growing louder and more deliberate, like whoever or whatever is making it wants me to know they're coming. The flashlight flickers, and for a split second, I see it. A figure standing at the edge of the beam, wearing the same white mask. My mask. They're holding something long and sharp. A machete, maybe. And they're dragging it along the floor as they walk toward me. I don't think. I just run. My feet pound against the concrete as I sprint toward the door, but it slams shut before I can reach it. The sound is deafening, like a gunshot, and I skid to a halt, whipping around to face the figure. They're still coming, their movements slow and deliberate, like they know there's nowhere for me to go. "Stay the fuck away from me," I scream, brandishing the flashlight like it's some kind of weapon. But they don't stop. They just keep coming, dragging the machete with that horrible grating sound that makes my teeth ache. Then, without warning, they stop. For a moment, the room is silent, except for the sound of my ragged breathing, and then they tilt their head, just like before, and point to something behind me. I turn, and my blood runs cold. There's another figure standing by the laptop now, but this one isn't wearing a mask. Their face is covered by a black hood, just like the person I saw in the stream. They're completely still, like a statue, and for a moment, I think they might be dead. But then their head snaps up, and I see their eyes, wide, bloodshot, and filled with terror. Before I can react, the laptop screen lights up again, and the red text returns. "Choose." "What the hell does that mean?" I shout, my voice echoing off the walls. But I already know the answer. The man with the mask takes a step forward, raising the machete, and I realize it's not a choice at all. It's an ultimatum. I look back at the hooded figure, who's now struggling against their restraints, their muffled cries barely audible through the gag in their mouth. I don't know who they are or how they got here, but I can feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. It's me or them. That's the game. The red text flickers, as if to emphasize the point. Time is running out. I don't remember making the decision. One moment, I'm standing there, frozen with fear, and the next, I'm moving. My hand closes around the pocket knife in my bag, and I feel the cold steel against my palm as I flip it open. The hooded figure is thrashing now, their eyes wide with panic. As I approach, I tell myself I don't have a choice, that it's them or me. But as I raise the knife, I can't help but wonder if that's exactly what they want me to think. When it's over, the lights come back on. The man in the mask is gone, the laptop is gone, and the warehouse is silent once more. My hands are covered in blood, and the hooded figure is slumped in the chair, motionless. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember anything after that. All I know is that when I woke up this morning, there was a new message waiting for me. You played well. See you in Act 3. I didn't go to work today. How could I? I spent the whole morning scrubbing blood off my hands, even though there wasn't a single drop left. The stains aren't on my skin, they're in my head. Every time I close my eyes, I see the hooded figure slumped in that chair, their body twisted and lifeless. And the worst part, I don't even know who they were. I didn't check. I didn't want to check. I keep telling myself it was self-defense, that I didn't have a choice. But deep down, I know that's not true. They made me think I didn't have a choice. They gave me the illusion of control. But the reality is, I played right into their hands. I don't know who they are, but whoever they are, they know me better than I know myself. That much is clear now. The message they sent this morning, "You played well, see you in Act 3, has been burned into my brain. Act 3. That means this isn't over. It's not even close. And the thought of going through this again, I don't know if I can do it, but I don't think I have a choice." Around noon, I decided to go through my laptop, looking for, I don't know, answers, clues, anything that might explain why I've been dragged into this nightmare. I started by combing through my browsing history, but it was clean. Too clean. Someone had wiped it. I even checked the hidden directories and system logs, but everything was gone, like it had been scrubbed by a professional. Then I checked my emails. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just the usual junk mail and spam. But then I saw it, an email with no subject line, sent from an address I didn't recognize. The only thing in the body of the email was a link. No text, no context, just a single hyperlink. I stared at it for what felt like hours, debating whether or not to click it. Every part of me knew it was a bad idea, but at this point, what did I have to lose? When I clicked the link, it took me to a private YouTube video. The title was just a string of random numbers and letters, and the thumbnail was completely black. I hit play, and for the first few seconds, there was nothing but static. Then the video cut to what looked like home movie footage. It was me, as a kid. The video showed me sitting on the floor of my childhood living room, playing with a set of toy cars. I couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. My mom was sitting on the couch in the background, reading a magazine. The camera panned around the room like someone was filming us, but I don't remember anyone ever recording this. In fact, I don't remember this moment at all. The footage skipped forward, glitching slightly, and now I was outside in the backyard, sitting by myself on the swing set. My face was blank, my eyes staring straight ahead like I was lost in thought. The camera zoomed in, uncomfortably close, until my face filled the screen. And then, in the faintest whisper, I heard it. "Do you remember?" The video cut to black. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. How the hell did they get that footage? I haven't lived in that house in over 20 years. My mom died when I was in college, and as far as I know, no one else ever had access to those tapes, assuming they even existed in the first place. I felt like I was losing my mind. Every logical explanation I came up with fell apart the moment I tried to piece it together. It's like they're not just watching me, they're inside my life, my memories, my past, and they're using it against me. That's when my phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. "You've always been a good actor. Let's see how well you perform when the stage is your own." I didn't have time to figure out what that meant, because moments later, someone started knocking on my door. Not knocking, exactly. Pounding. I froze, my heart racing, as the sound echoed through my apartment. No one ever visits me unannounced, especially not this late in the day. The pounding stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. I crept toward the door, peeking through the peephole, but there was no one there. Just the empty hallway. My hand hovered over the doorknob, debating whether or not to open it, when I noticed something on the floor. A package. It was small and wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address. I brought it inside, my hands trembling, as I tore off the wrapping. Inside was an old VHS tape, with a single word scrawled across the label in red ink. Confession. I don't even own a VHS player, but I found one at a thrift store down the street. When I got home, I hooked it up to my TV and inserted the tape. The screen flickered for a moment before the video began playing. It was footage of my apartment. Current footage. The camera was positioned in the corner of my living room, pointing directly at the couch where I was sitting. The quality was grainy, but I could see myself clear as day, sitting there with the package in my hands, unwrapping it. Then the camera panned, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was someone else in the room with me. They were standing in the shadows, just out of view, watching me. They weren't wearing a mask this time, but their face was obscured by a hood. I couldn't make out any details, but I could feel their presence, looming, predatory, like they were waiting for the right moment to strike. The video cut to static, and then a new scene appeared. This time, the footage was in a basement, a different one, not the warehouse from last night. The walls were covered in newspaper clippings, all of them about unsolved murders and missing persons. In the center of the room was a table, and on the table was a file. The camera zoomed in, and I saw my name written on the tab. The screen went black, and then the red text appeared again. Act 3 begins tonight. 1 a.m. You know where to go. I don't know what to do. They've been in my apartment. They know everything about me. My past, my present, my secrets. And now they're dragging me deeper into this nightmare, piece by piece. But here's the part that's really eating at me. The file in the video. I think I've seen it before. Back when I was a kid, my mom used to keep a locked drawer in her desk, and I swear, I saw that same file in there once when she forgot to lock it. I don't know what it was, but she freaked out when she caught me looking at it. She wouldn't even tell me what was inside. What if this isn't just about me? What if it's about her too? I don't have the answers yet, but I know one thing for sure. I'm running out of time. I didn't want to go. Every instinct in my body told me to lock the doors, unplug everything, and wait it out. But you know what they say about instincts? They don't mean shit when you're already trapped. I knew that staying here wouldn't change anything. They'd already proven they could reach me whenever, wherever they wanted. Ignoring their message would only make things worse. So, at 12:45 a.m., I got in my car and started driving. The coordinates they sent led me to the outskirts of town, down a long winding road that eventually turned to dirt. There were no streetlights, no signs, just endless darkness pressing in on all sides. My headlights barely cut through the fog, and with every passing mile, the pit in my stomach grew deeper. Finally, I arrived at what looked like an abandoned amusement park, the kind of place that hadn't seen visitors in decades. Rusted rides stood like skeletons in the mist, their paint chipped and faded. The main gate was wide open, the words Dreamland barely visible above the arch, their neon lettering broken and hanging by wires. My phone buzzed. Another message. The stage is set. Welcome home. I didn't even bother replying. I shoved the phone in my pocket, grabbed the flashlight, and stepped out of the car. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, and every step I took made the gravel crunch loud enough to set my nerves on edge. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint creak of a Ferris wheel turning in the wind. I knew it was just my imagination. There was no power here, but that didn't make it any less unsettling. The coordinates led me to the center of the park, where a massive carousel stood in eerie silence. The painted horses were cracked and weathered, their glass eyes staring blankly into the void. But what really caught my attention was the spotlight. It was mounted on a tripod, aimed directly at the carousel, and in the center of the light, tied to one of the horses, was a figure. I approached slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure was hooded, just like the one in the warehouse. Their hands were bound behind their back, and their head was slumped forward, as if they were unconscious. But as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The hood wasn't black this time. It was red, and when I reached out to pull it off, I felt my stomach twist into a knot. It was me. Not a wax figure, not a mask, not some creepy impersonation. It was me. My face, my body, my clothes. The same hoodie and jeans I was wearing right now. The me on the horse was pale and lifeless, though eyes half open, staring at nothing. I stumbled back, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some kind of sick joke? A twin I didn't know about? A hallucination? Before I could process any of it, the spotlight flickered and went out. The carousel groaned to life, the music box chimes echoing through the park in warped, dissonant tones. The horses began to move, their rusted poles scraping against the mechanism, and the figure, my figure, slumped further, as if the motion was too much for their body to handle. And then I heard the voice. "You've come so far, haven't you?" It wasn't coming from the carousel. It wasn't coming from anywhere. It was everywhere, surrounding me, pressing into my ears like static. The tone was smooth, almost amused, but there was an edge to it, a cruel, mocking undertone that made my skin crawl. All this time, you thought you were the one in control. But control is an illusion, isn't it? You've been following the script from the very beginning. The carousel stopped abruptly, and the figure slumped to the ground like a rag doll. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. My flashlight flickered, and when the beam steadied, I saw them. The man in the mask. He was standing just beyond the carousel, holding something in his hand. A folder. The folder. The one from the video. My name was still written across the tab, the ink smudged, but legible. He didn't say anything. He just held it out to me, waiting. I don't know why I took it. Maybe I thought it would give me answers. Maybe I just wanted this to be over. Either way, my hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all of me. Some were recent, taken within the past few days. Others were older, much older, dating back to my childhood. There were pictures of me playing in the yard, sitting at the dinner table, sleeping in my bed. But the one that stopped me cold was the last one. It was my mother. She was sitting at her desk, staring straight into the camera with a look of pure terror on her face. Her hands were tied, and there was a figure standing behind her, a man wearing a mask, the same mask. The voice returned, louder this time. She played her part well, didn't she? But the sins of the past always catch up in the end. Like mother, like son. The pieces started to click together, but none of it made sense. My mom had secrets. I'd known that much for years. The locked drawer in her desk, the late-night phone calls, the way she'd flinch whenever the doorbell rang. But this was something else entirely. Had she been part of this game? Was she a victim? A participant? And what the hell did it have to do with me? I looked up, ready to demand answers, but the man in the mask was gone. In his place, there was a camera, an old bulky camcorder mounted on a tripod, its red light blinking. A message scrolled across the small screen. Smile for the audience. Before I could react, the carousel roared to life again, the lights flashing and the music blaring. But this time, it wasn't just the horses moving. Figures emerged from the shadows, dozens of them, all wearing masks. Some were plain white, like his. Others were grotesque, twisted parodies of human faces. They surrounded me, their footsteps echoing in unison, their heads tilting in perfect synchrony. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there. My flashlight bobbed wildly as I sprinted through the park, past rusted roller coasters and decaying food stands. The masked figures didn't chase me, but I could feel their presence, like they were guiding me, herding me towards something. Finally, I reached the exit. My car was still there, but as I approached, I saw it. A new message scrolled across the windshield in red paint. The curtain falls when you stop running. I don't remember getting home. I don't even remember starting the car. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on my couch, staring at the folder in my lap. The photographs were gone. The only thing left inside was a single piece of paper with one final message. Act 3 is complete. Enjoy your standing ovation. I don't know what they meant by that, but I think I'm starting to understand. This isn't just a game, it's a performance. And I'm the main attraction. The audience is still watching. I can feel them, even now. I don't know if they'll ever stop, but I know one thing for sure. There's no escaping the stage. The end